10 Nights Dreaming and the Cat's Grave. The first night. The first dream is a relatively straightforward tale, whose vivid imagery foreshadows many of the themes running through the collection. This is what I dreamed. I was sitting, arms folded, by the pillow of a woman who lay with her face towards the sky. "I am dying," she said in a quiet voice. Her long, flowing hair spread across her pillow, framing the soft outlines of her oval face. Within the pure white of her cheeks, her blood showed its color warmly, and her lips, of course, were red. She did not look about to die at all. But she had said quite distinctly in her quiet voice that she was dying. I found myself in agreement with her. She would surely die. "Are you sure? Are you really dying?" I asked, peering down at her face. Her eyes opened wide. "Yes," she replied, "I am dying." Within the long lashes that enclosed her large, moist eyes was the purest black. In the depths of those pure black pupils, my form floated vivid and clear. Gazing at those shining dark eyes, so deep that they were almost transparent, I could not accept that she would die. Lowering my mouth to her pillow, I spoke again. "You aren't dying, surely." "You'll be fine," I said. "You'll be fine." "No, I am dying," the woman insisted, in the same small voice, eyes drowsy but not yet closed. "There's nothing to be done about it." "Well, can you see my face?" I asked, watching her closely. "Why," she replied with a smile, "isn't that its reflection, right there?" I straightened up again in silence. Folding my arms, I wondered if she really had to die. Sometime later, the woman spoke again. "When I am dead, please bury me. Dig a hole with a large oyster shell, then use a fallen fragment from a star to mark where I lie. That done, please wait beside the grave. I will come to you again." I asked her when that would be. "The sun will rise, as you know. After that it will set. Then it will rise again and then set again. Can you wait for me even as the red sun sinks from east to west, east to west?" I nodded silently. A new note of determination entered the woman's quiet voice. "Please wait 100 years, she said. "Sit beside my grave and wait 100 years. I will come to you, I promise." I told her simply that I would wait. At once I saw my form in her black eyes, so vivid and clear, begin to blur and break. Just as it started to run, like a reflection in still water muddled by movement, the woman shut her eyes tightly. A tear spilled from between her eyelashes onto her cheek. She was dead. I went down to the garden and dug a hole with an oyster shell. The shell was sharp, with a long, gently curved edge. The mother of pearl inside the shell glinted in the moonlight with every scoop of earth I removed. The smell of damp earth was in the air. 2. After a time, the hole was complete. I lowered the woman into it. Then I gently covered her with the soft earth. The mother of pearl inside the shell caught the moonlight with each scoop. This done, I went and found a fallen fragment from a star to place on top. The fragment was round. I suppose that its corners had been worn away during its long fall through the sky, leaving it smooth. I felt the warmth of the fragment against my breast and in my hands as I cradled it in both my arms and lowered it carefully into place. I sat down on some moss. "So this is how I will spend the next 100 years, I thought, gazing at the round gravestone with my arms crossed. Before long, the sun rose in the east, just as the woman had said it would. It was a large red sun. Eventually, again, just as the woman had said, the sun set in the west. It stayed as red as ever as it sank out of sight. 1, I counted. Sometime later, the crimson orb slowly rose again. Then it silently sank. 2, I counted again. I do not know how many such suns I counted. I counted and counted, but more passed overhead, and then than I could possibly count. And yet 100 years had still not passed. Finally, staring at the round stone which was by now covered with moss, I began to wonder if the woman had not deceived me. At that moment a green shoot appeared from under the stone, stretching up towards me at an angle as it grew. The shoot grew longer as I watched, stopping just as it reached my chest. Then as the shoot swayed from side to side, the single long, thin bud at its drooping tip slowly opened its petals. It was a pure white lily, right under my nose, so fragrant that I felt it in my bones. A single dewdrop fell onto it from far above, making the lily rock back and forth under its own weight. I leaned forward and kissed its cold, white, dew-moistened petals. As I straightened up again, I happened to see the dawn star twinkling all alone in the distant sky. I realized then for the first time that 100 years had passed. Red sun meant traditionally, the sun is red, not yellow. Lily is written with 2 characters that mean 100 and meet. Interesting. The second night. In the second dream, the narrator finds himself a samurai in a Zen temple. Perhaps drawing on his own experiences at Engakuji Temple in the 1890s, Soseki distorts the imagery and rhetoric of Zen to portray a fundamental misapprehension of the nature of Zen practice. This is what I dreamed. Leaving the Osho's room, I followed the corridor back to my own and found the ando burning dully. When I half knelt on a cushion to adjust the wick, the charred tip broke off and tumbled like a flower to the red lacquered stand below. At the same time, the room brightened. The picture on the fusuma was a busong. Black willows were drawn densely here and sparsely there, below a shivering fisherman traversing an embankment, woven casa askew. The alcove was hung with a scroll depicting Manjusri crossing the sea. The fragrance of incense lingered in the room's dimmer reaches. The temple was so large and still that it felt deserted. When I glanced up at the black ceiling, for a moment the pool of shadow cast there by the round ando looked like a living thing. Still on one knee, I turned up a corner of the cushion with my left hand and reached underneath with my right. There it was, just as it should be. Thus reassured, I let the corner fall back and into place and sat down on the cushion heavily. "You are a samurai," the Osho had said. As a samurai, satori should not be beyond you. Watching you sit there day after day with no satori to show for it, well, perhaps you are no samurai after all. Human garbage would be more like it. Oh ho! Now you are angry, he had continued with a laugh. If what I say upsets you, Then find Satori and bring me proof. With that, he turned his face away. The insolence. I would show him. I would reach Satori before the clock in the alcove one room over struck the next hour. Having done so, I would return for a second interview with him that very night. And at that interview I would exchange my Satori for his head. I could not take his life without achieving Satori first. There was no option but to succeed. I was a samurai. If Satori proved beyond me, I would turn my blade on myself. No samurai can live in humiliation. I would die quickly and cleanly. At this thought, I found my hand slipping under the cushion again. When it came out, it was holding a tanto in a red lacquered scabbard. I grasped the sword by the hilt. The cold blade gleamed once in the dark room as I cast the scabbard aside. Something terrible seemed to stream from my hand, gathering to a single point of murderous intent at the tip of the blade. Seeing the wicked blade mercilessly reduced to a pinprick, driven to a sharpening point at the end of its full 9.5 inches, I felt a sudden urge to drive it deep. All the blood in my body flowed towards my right wrist, and the hilt felt sticky in my grip. My lips trembled. Returning the tanto to its scabbard and placing it close to me on my right, I crossed my legs into the full lotus position. Joshu had said, "Mu," but what was "mu" supposed to mean? Pious jackass, I gritted my teeth. My back teeth ground together so fiercely that my breath came hot and ragged through my nose. There was a painful tightness at my temples. I forced my eyes open twice as wide as usual. I saw the scroll, I saw the ando, I saw the tatami, I saw the Osho's great bold kettle of a head as clearly as if it were right in front of me. I even heard the mocking laugh from his crocodilian mouth. Insolent, bold-headed fool. There was no way around it. That kettle had to come off his shoulders. I would attain his Satori of his. Moo moo. I strained at the word from the root of my tongue. But for all my moos, I still smelled incense. How dare mere incense interfere? I suddenly clenched my fists and battered my head until it hurt. I ground my teeth back and forth. Sweat ran down my sides. My back was stiff as a wooden pole. My knee joints flared with pain. Let them break, then, I thought, but it still hurt. It was excruciating. Mu was yet to make its appearance. Every time it seemed on the verge of appearing, the pain returned. It was enraging. It was mortifying. I was humiliated beyond belief. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I longed for some great boulder I could hurl myself against, dashing body and bone alike into pieces. And yet I endured, seated and still. An unbearable despair swelled in my breast. It seized me bodily from below and rushed through me, and desperately seeking escape through my pores. But every surface was blocked. It was trapped with no exit in the cruelest of circumstances. My mind began to warp. The ando and the buson, the tatami mats, and the overlapping shelves, All were there and not there, not there yet there. But still there was no sign of Mu. It seemed that I had just been sitting around to no particular purpose. And then, without warning, the clock in the next room began to chime. I started. My right hand went straight to the tanto. The clock chimed the second time. Osho is the head priest of a Zen temple. Ando is a wooden-framed paper lamp. Fusuma is a sliding room divider. And Buson is Yosa Buson, a haiku poet and artist. Kasa is like a hat. Manjusri crossing the sea is, well, crossing the ocean to arrive in Japan. Satori is enlightenment or realization. Tanto is a dagger. Joshu's mu is, well, it's too long. Tadami is just a mat. Anyway, the third night, in the third dream, the series takes a turn for the sinister. Some see a connection between the events of this dream and Soseki's own unhappy childhood. This is what I dreamed. I was carrying a child of almost 6 on my back. It was clear to me that he was my son. Mysteriously, however, he had gone blind at some point, and his head was shaved blue. When did you go blind? I asked him, and he replied, "What? I've been blind forever." His voice was unmistakably a child, but he spoke like an adult. As an equal, in fact. Green rice paddies lay to the left and right. The path was narrow. From time to time, a heron's form flashed in the gloom. "We've reached the paddies, then," the child on my back said. "How did you know?" I asked, twisting around to see him. "The herons, can't you hear them calling?" he asked. At this, a heron did indeed let out 2 short cries. I was beginning to fear this child, a sort of son of mine though he be. Who knew what lay in store for me, carrying something like him on my back? Wondering if there was somewhere I could dump him, I saw a large forest in the darkness that lay ahead. No sooner had I thought, that might do it, than I heard a chuckle from my back. "What's so funny?" I asked. The child did not answer me. "Am I heavy, father?" he asked. "No, you're not heavy," I replied. "I will be," he said. Keeping the forest in sight, I walked on in silence. The path through the paddies was irregular and winding, never quite leading to where I wanted to go. Finally, we arrived at a fork in the road. I paused for a moment right where the roads parted to catch my breath. "There should be a stone marker," the boy said. Just as he said, a small pillar of stone stood nearby, 8 inches square and as tall as my waist. Fucking hell. According to the pillar, the left fork led to Higakubo and the right to Hotahara. Dark as it had gotten, the red lettering was clearly visible. The characters were the same red as a newt's belly. Oh, fuck it. "You want to go to the left," the boy ordered. Looking left, I saw the forest from before, rising into the sky, casting its dark shadow down over our heads. I hesitated. "Don't hold back on my account," the boy said. Seeing nothing else for it, I began walking towards the forest. There were no more forks in the path. Sure knows a lot for a blind kid, I thought to myself as we drew near the forest. And then I heard the voice from my back again. I know it makes things difficult, my being blind. "I'm carrying you, aren't I? What's the problem?" "I appreciate that, but I won't put up with mockery, especially from my own father." I couldn't stand any more of this. I quickened my pace to get to the forest and dump him as soon as I could. "You'll understand a little further on," the boy said from the back. Then he spoke again, as if talking to himself. It was an evening just like this, come to think of it. "What was?" I asked, strain in my voice. "What was?" the child sneered. "As if you didn't know," and with this I began to feel as if I did know, somehow. I couldn't quite put my finger on what had happened, but I was sure it had been an evening just like this one. I also felt that I would, indeed, understand a little further on, and that this understanding would be a terrible thing. So it was imperative that I dump the boy. Quickly, before it could arrive, I walked even faster. It had been raining for a while now. The path grew darker by degrees, but the little boy clinging to my back shone like a mirror from which nothing escaped, casting a merciless light on every part of my past, present, and future. What's more, this boy was my own son, and blind at that, it was unbearable. "This is the place, right here, right at the foot of that cedar." I heard the boy's voice clearly through the rain. Before I knew what I was doing, I had stopped. We had entered the forest at some point. The black thing a few paces ahead, I had to admit, looked like a cedar tree, just as the boy said. "It was at the foot of that cedar, wasn't it, father?" "Yes," I replied without thinking, "it was. The 5th year of Bunka, the year of the dragon." This sounded right to me. "It was exactly 100 years ago that you killed me." As soon as I heard these words, the knowledge burst into my head. 100 years ago, in the 5th year of Bunka, the year of the dragon, on a dark evening just like this, I had killed a blind man at the foot of this very cedar tree. I'm a murderer, I realized at last, and as it hit me, the child on my back was suddenly as heavy as a roadside statue of Jizo. This is 1808 on the Gregorian calendar, 100 years before 10 Nights Dreaming got published. And the roadside statue of Jizo means a bodhisattva Kitagarbha. Jizo is a guardian of children, especially those who die before their parents, and statues of Jizo can commonly be found by the roadside and in cemeteries. Oh yeah, Ojizo-sama, yeah. Now the 4th night, and the central figure of the 4th dream, as Sasabuchi Tomoichi points out, appears to be a cross between a Taoist immortal and a Meiji street peddler. In the middle of a large room with a floor of pounded earth stood something like a bench surrounded by little folding stools. The bench was a glossy black in color. An old man sat drinking by himself in the corner at a square zen tray with a small dish of nishime stew in it upon it. The old man was already quite ruddy with drink. Beyond that, his face positively shone with vitality, without even a wrinkle. The only thing that revealed his age was his long white beard. Still a child myself, I wondered just how old he might be. Then the proprietress came in, wiping her hands on her apron and carrying a small wooden bucket, which she must have just filled with water at the bamboo kake out back. "How old are you, Oji-san?" she asked. The old man's cheeks were bulging with food, and he had to swallow before he could reply. "I can't remember," he said at last. The proprietress tucked her hands into her narrow obi and stood where she was, looking across at the old man's face. The old man threw back a mouthful of sake from a large cup that looked like a rice bowl and then let out a long, audible exhalation through his white beard. As he did, the proprietress spoke again. "Where do you live?" she asked. The old man cut his exhalations short. "Inside my navel," he said. "And where are you headed?" asked the proprietress, hands still in her narrow obi. The old man drained his cup again and let out another long breath before replying. "I'm going away," he said. "Straight ahead?" asked the proprietress. As she spoke, the old man's breath went through the shoji, passed under the willow, and continued straight on towards the riverbed. The old man went outside. I followed him out. A small gourd hung from his waist, and he had a square box slung over one shoulder and tucked under his arm. He wore pale yellow momohiki trousers and a pale yellow sleeveless tunic. Only the tabi on his feet were a brighter yellow. Something about them made me think they were made of leather. The old man went straight to the willow. 3 or 4 children were already there. The old man beamed jovially as he pulled a pale yellow tenugui from his waist, twisting the tenugui into a sort of thin rope. He placed it in the middle of the clearing and then drew a circle around it. Finally, he pulled a candy peddler's brass flute from the box slung over his shoulder. "Any moment now, that tenugui is going to turn into a snake," he said. "Keep watching, keep watching." The children watched the tenugui intently. I watched too. Keep watching, he said. He repeated. "Ready?" Then playing his flute as he went, he began to circle the tenugui along the ring he had drawn around it. I kept my eyes fixed on the tenugui. It did not move a bit. Round and around the old man went, tootling away on his flute. He walked carefully, tiptoeing in his straw waraji sandals, as if trying not to disturb the tenugui. The look on his face might have been fear. There also seemed to be enjoyment there. After a time, the old man's flute fell silent. Opening the box slung over his shoulder again, he gingerly picked up the tenugui by its head and tossed it in. "Now it will turn into a snake inside the box," he said. "I'll show you any moment now, any moment now." He began to walk straight ahead. Passing under the willow, he went straight on down a narrow path. Hoping to see the snake, I followed him down the road as far as he went. Every so often he would say, "Any moment now," or "A snake, it'll turn into a snake," as he walked. Finally, as we arrived at the banks of the river, he broke into a song. Now, any moment now, a snake it'll become. Yes, it's sure to happen now. Hear the flute's song. Seeing neither bridge nor boat, I thought the old man would stop here and show us the snake in his box. But he plunged forward into the river. At first the water only came up to his knees, but before long it was at his waist, and soon he had disappeared up to his chest. Still he sang, now getting deeper now, turning into night, yes, going straight ahead. He showed no sign of stopping. His beard disappeared from view, then his face, then the top of his head, until finally even the little cap he wore was gone. I was sure he would show me the snake when he came out on the other side, so I stood alone where the rushes rustled, and waiting, but the old man never came back up. The fifth night is a pastiche of imagery from Japan's ancient and even mythological past. The increasing sophistication of the narrative hints at the ways in which Soseki will push the boundaries of the dream conceit before the series is over. This is what I dreamed. Long, long ago, perhaps almost reaching back to the age of the gods, bad luck in battle saw me defeated, captured alive, and dragged before the enemy chieftain. In those days, all the men were tall. They also all let their beards grow long. Around their waists they wore leather belts from which they hung swords that looked like clubs. Their bows looked like thick wisteria, or vines, torn straight from the tree. They did not lacquer or even polish them before use. They were simple and rough in the extreme. The enemy chieftain was seated on what looked like an overturned sake pot. He held his bow upright. Gripping it square in the middle with his right hand and letting its lowest point rest on the grass below. Looking at his face, I saw that his bushy eyebrows met above his nose. In those old days, of course, there was no such thing as a razor. As a captive, I was not permitted a stool, so I sat cross-legged on the grass. On my feet I wore long straw boots. Such boots were deeply made back then. Mine came up to my knees when I was standing. The straw around the top had been left partly unwoven so that it hung down like a decorative fringe, rustling with each step. The chieftain looked me in the face by the light of the bonfire and asked if I would live or die. It was customary in those days to at least ask this question of all prisoners. To choose life was to surrender, while death indicated refusal to submit. Die, I replied shortly. The chieftain threw aside the bow he was resting on the grass and began to draw the club-like sword that hung at his waist. The bonfire blazed in a gust of wind, sending flames flickering across the blade. I opened my right hand like a maple leaf and raised it palm out to just above eye level. This was a sign that meant wait. The chieftain resheathed his thick sword with a metallic sound. Even in those days they knew love. I told the chieftain that I wanted to see the woman I cared for once more before I died. The chieftain said that he would wait until dawn broke and the rooster crowed. I would have to summon the woman to me by then. If she had not arrived by the crow of the rooster, I would be killed before I could see her again. Still seated, the chieftain gazed into the bonfire. Down on the grass, with her big straw boots still crossed, I waited for the woman. The night wore on. From time to time, I heard the bonfire settle. This would make the flames lick at the chieftain, as if thrown off balance. The chieftain's eyes would sparkle under his pitch-black eyebrows. Then someone would approach and throw a new armful of branches into the fire. Eventually the fire would begin to crackle. It was a valiant sound, a sound that could turn back the gloom of night. Meanwhile, a woman was untying a white horse from the oak tree behind her house. Stroking its mane light 3 times, she leapt lightly onto its back. She rode bareback, with no saddle or stirrups. Her long white legs kicked the horse's flank, and it broke at once into a full gallop. Far off in the sky, she could see the faint light of the newly fed bonfire. The horse flew through the darkness towards its light. Its breath erupted from its nose like 2 pillars of fire as it ran. Still the woman urged it on, kicking its belly again and again with her slim legs. The horse galloped so quickly that the sky rang with the sound of its hooves. The woman's hair streamed out in the darkness behind her. But still she did not arrive at the bonfire. Suddenly, from the side of the road where the darkness was complete, the woman heard the cock-a-doodle-doo of a rooster's crow. She leaned back, pulling sharply on the reins with both hands. The horse's 2 front hooves dug into the hard rock below. Cock-a-doodle-doo, the rooster crowed again. With a small cry of surprise, the woman let the reins go limp. The horse collapsed to its knees and pitched forward, rider and all. A deep crevice had lain just out of sight beneath the rocks. The impression the horse's hooves left on that rock is still there today. It was the trickster Amano Jaku who had imitated the rooster's crow. For as long as those hoof marks remain in the rock, Amano Jaku shall be my sworn enemy.